good to go?
Yeah, let's do it. What's up?
So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Sorina Campan. I lead on stakeholder engagement for the Entrepreneurship Center at Said Business School. And I'm delighted to be hosting this year's first event of the Trailblazer Chronicles. This is a joint speaker series between the Entrepreneurship Center at Said Business School, the Oxford Foundry, the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship, and the series seeks to invite on campus outstanding individuals who are pioneers of their personal journey, the business or their industry. The theme we have chosen for this academic year is collective power. In these exceptional times, we believe that it's more important than ever to bring together our collective strength and strive to build a more equitable future for all. With that in mind, our guest today is one of the leaders of the crowdfunding revolution, Yancey Strickler. He's an author, an entrepreneur, co-founder, and former CEO of Kickstarter, the author of This Could Be Our Future, a manifesto for a more generous world, and the creator of Bentoism. Yancey is a distinguished fellow at the Drucker Institute, a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, and one of Fast Company's most creative people. He advises CEOs, activists, and artists around the world. And the London Spectator called him one of the least obnoxious tech evangelists ever. Yancey, a very warm virtual welcome to Oxford.
Yeah, what's up? Great to be with you all. And sorry we had to reschedule a couple weeks, but glad we're here again.
So we have about 1 hour together today, and we will be spending most of it taking questions from our audience. So everyone out there, get ready. But before we move to that, to get us started and to better understand the beginnings of your journey, I want to ask you about your upbringing. Looking at your trajectory so far, values and principles, they were always in the focus. So how was the community you grew up in, and how did it shape your value system? And how important was that environment in helping you become who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely just like a larger version of my childhood experience in so many ways. But I'm American, and I grew up on a farm in Southwest Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains, where bluegrass music, country music comes from, and lived there, you know, in the country. Was a evangelical Christian, went to a Christian school. But my father was also a musician, and I loved reading, and I loved the wider world. And already there's this conflict between being curious about the world and also being part of a very devout religion. But there is a kind of an ethos that I think I took from both of those things. You know, the churches I went to, you know, they would preach about the dangers of wealth, how it's easier for, easier for a camel to pass through a needle's eye than a rich man to go into heaven. Like, this is like a core scripture where I was going to church. But I was also, you know, into a lot of underground music and independent film, and really appreciated, you know, just things that people had to struggle to make. A formative experience for me was seeing the band Fugazi, the punk hardcore band, who, you know, had this code that they always followed, that every show was $5 and was all ages, and that they had this pledge that if you didn't like the show, you could leave at any time and you'd get your $5 back when you left. Like, there was this egalitarian code that's at the heart of what they did. And so I think all of those things really shaped me and shaped my value system and kind of what I respond to and what I don't respond to. And these things came to an interesting head in the creation of Kickstarter, where, you know, I was a music journalist, a writer before becoming an entrepreneur. I had no interest in being an entrepreneur. In retrospect, I could see that there are a lot of things from my past that would actually say that was a good path for me. But at the time, it wasn't what I intended to do. And so stepping into the world of business, not having gone to business school, really having had no formal training whatsoever, but having a strong sense of values for all these other reasons, you know, created a lot of, a lot of interesting dynamics, where sometimes feeling like a fish out of water. Other times, I think with Kickstarter, we had fresh eyes that allowed us to see opportunities that others couldn't, and also to maybe anticipate where the world was going, say becoming a public benefit corporation, 5 years ago, being one of the first companies to do so. So I think a lot of that comes into this, this not quite fitting in, the strange mix of experiences that, I found the most interesting projects and the things that are most resonant with me are ones that kind of hold that tension between being very community oriented, being very egalitarian, but also, kind of progressive and pushing the boundaries of what we, the norms that we hold.
So actually, since Kickstarter launched back in 2009, through collective power, billions of dollars have been passed on to creative entrepreneurs, and over 100,000 new ideas came through life to it. Anything from Oscar-winning movies to new technologies. So this is an incredible legacy. And I was curious to know if you can remember the exact moment that kickstarted this entrepreneurial adventure for you, even though you weren't necessarily planning on embarking on it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they feel like the experiences of another person's life. It's funny how that works. It's. But yeah, no, I remember it all, very clearly. I mean, it was being compelled by the truth of an idea. It was my friend Perry Chen first had the idea for Kickstarter, and we met, at a restaurant where he was waiting tables and I was just a regular. We became friends, and he had this idea for, he'd wanted to put on a concert. He couldn't front the 20 grand himself, but he thought if people could pay tickets ahead of time and only be charged if the show's sold out, that could be a way that like something could happen that wouldn't otherwise. And it was just a really compelling idea and vision and very exciting to think about. And especially for us being creative people and feeling like the arts and creativity were really unappreciated. This is still a period where to make anything, you have to go pitch a publisher, a bunch of executives who are just looking for hits. And so what you find would be artists contorting their visions to meet what the commercial aspirations, commercial desires of the people who had money were. And that was producing bad work. It's just like self-compromise from the get-go just to justify your existence. And so what we were really motivated by was, could you create an alternative universe where ideas were funded not by their potential to be hits, like that should be irrelevant, but instead they would just be funded based on whatever criteria the creator themselves says. That a world where all creative ideas had to justify their existence through what the person with money said, what their model said was likely to make money, like that is such an obviously limited prism, view of the world. And so we were imagining, could you create a different universe where the valid reasons for existence weren't your potential profit, your potential profits or your growth trajectories, but was simply any other reason, that the story you told, work you've done in the past, how much people like you, how cute you are, how smart you are, whatever the other million reasons why we as human beings value things or respond to things. And so could ideas exist purely on those merits? And the internet has made that happen to such an enormous degree. Crowdfunding, being the window that's happening through. And I absolutely connect, our pioneering of crowdfunding with Patreon, with even things like OnlyFans, with the degree to which it is socially acceptable to directly pay another person on the internet for something that isn't a clear exchange of goods and services. It is a modern form of patronage. Is it a different form of financial and social interaction that, when we were pitching potential investors on Kickstarter, people really didn't like the idea because they thought you should have to have a financial stake in projects you support. No one will put money into things if they don't get a cut. But there is now billions of dollars changing hands every year purely through these non-financially self-oriented incentives that, from a traditional perspective, don't make a lot of sense. You maybe group them under charity, but they are a valid expression of human desire, of something that is important. It's an expression of love, of loyalty, all kinds of different things. And I think that they reflect, a first key step in showing how the internet and the digital age really changes what we shift as being valuable and changes the reasons why things happen and does so at greater and greater scale. So crowdfunding is here for good, just because it's so useful. And what we're going to find is that similarly in other places, we've allowed one single dominant value system to determine what happens or what doesn't happen. And the internet is going to allow us to open that up in, hugely significant ways.
So you took a different approach to business, and beyond the business idea itself, you were headquartered in New York, uninterested in going public, and you mentioned earlier reincorporating as a public benefit corporation. So tell us a little bit more about this business philosophy, and also how did you define success for Kickstarter, and how did you know the business had achieved that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Well, I think that we put our values at the core of the business from the beginning. A lot of it is just inherent to who we are as founders, and the fact that we're making a platform for creative people and artists to fundraise. And at the time we launched, fundraising had such a negative brand connotation. Like it's someone sitting in a subway holding out a tin cup, right? Was how we thought about fundraising online before Kickstarter. And so we're trying to make it socially acceptable. We're trying to make it cool, trying to make it palatable. And it just means that you really have to put yourself in the mindset of that creator. And, we are those people as founders, so we could think about that. But what it immediately brings up is like, I don't want to be a part of a platform that's going to financially exploit me. I don't want to be a part of a platform that's like trying to put their brand over top of me. I don't want to be a part of a platform that doesn't understand like what it is to be an independent creative person. And so, for us, it was natural that those sorts of values and considerations and the things that are in our PBC charter should be there. But there was also a business strategy of like, the most important customers to this business are artists and creative people. They are especially sensitive to things like this. We always need to be aligned with them. Being aligned with them is at the heart of the success of this business. So, we became a public benefit corporation, like reincorporating the legal foundation of the company, and making it so that the Kickstarter would say, always have to prioritize non-commercial forms of art. That Kickstarter would donate a percentage of its profits to funding arts education, and also to fighting systemic inequality in various forms, and trying to bind the company to a certain standard of behavior, because we believe that money ultimately ruins everything in the end, right? Like if we allowed Kickstarter to be bought by some larger entity, it would eventually become some commercialized crap shadow of itself. And that, words are cheap, actions are harder, sacrifice is the only real action that I think has real currency. Everything else is kind of BS. And so how can we structurally shift our organization to reflect what's important? Now, I work with a lot of startups today, and some of those startups I work with work in the climate and work on like some mega challenging issues we face. And I always tell those people, like, you don't want to be the indie rock success story. You don't want to be the feel good, indie sleeper hit. Like, your job is to dominate the world. Your job is to, be acquired by Amazon for $1 billion and change the way they do business. Like, this Kickstarter strategy makes sense for what Kickstarter was about, but there are other types of businesses, especially climate related businesses, where using blitzscaling to get as big as possible, like pursuing those strategies, I think absolutely makes sense. There's not a moral conflict there. And so to some degree, you are choosing a strategy that reflects, what is the core customer that we're reaching? What is going to be important in this space in the long run? And even for us as Kickstarter, we pioneered the crowdfunding space. We created that space, but we knew from the beginning that we weren't going to own all of that space, and we should never try. So we focused on creativity, like carved out this niche that we really defended, and we left everything else, like, we're not going to do it. We didn't do charity. We didn't do X, Y, and Z things, because we knew that over time, the marketplace would be crowded, and you have to have that space. So even inventing a nascent form of commerce, we still had this very specific focus, because If this works, shit's going to get crowded. We got to be clear on who we are from the start. You can't try to own a whole market. The idea is, what is the position that allows you to provide value and exist for the long run? And so all of our decisions were kind of thinking about that. Like, how does this stick around? How does this not get ruined? And kind of our inspiration was like Craigslist. Craigslist was probably our strongest product, inspiration of just, it knows what it is. It's not trying to be anything else, and it's going to be there forever. And that seemed like the ultimate success.
Oxford is famous for its debating tradition, being home to the world's most prestigious debating society, the Oxford Union. And traditionally, we would kick off the MBA program here at the business school with a debate at the union. And we would bring forward the most provocative motion, which goes like this. This house believes that there is one and only one social responsibility of business to increase its profits. And you would recognize there the words of Friedman. And without exception, this motion would be rejected. And however, despite millennials and Generation Z being acutely aware of the fact that the status quo in business is not the answer, we are yet to see a fundamental shift in capitalism as we know it. Why do you think that is? And what do you think collectively we could do differently to shift this course?
Yeah, well, I have a lot of thoughts that I did not prepare deeply for this. I'm going to share. I do have one thing I prepared to think about this, but maybe one thing to start in Friedman's defense, which is to say, I do believe it is ideal that we live in societies that have strong enough states that are responsive to the challenges that we face, that know how to create just policy, that are, that reflect the democratic desires of the population, and where businesses are just only thinking about the survival and the thriving of their organizations and the people who are part of them, because that is a world of work on its own. And so I do think the idea that an ideal society is where each group is empowered to do what it's best at, and other people are empowered to do what they are best at. I do think that is an ideal end game. The challenge, of course, is that we don't have those sorts of actual democratic societies because of the influence of money and the power of capital to a large degree. But I do think I don't reject it outright in a sense that it is important that our institutions are focusing on the things that they are especially good at. But the one area where I think that we are limited is really at the foundation of capitalism, where capitalism is built on an inherent belief that a trust in people acting out of their own self-interest. And that if you empower people to look out for themselves, you're going to get better results than trying to morally implore people to do something, or saying, this is what you must do, this is what you should do. And that those kinds of systems don't work. And I think that there is some truth to that, but the issue is that our notion of self-interest, I believe, is way too limited, way too narrow. And so the emblem, the icon of self-interest today is the hockey stick graph, a chart where a line measuring whatever it is that we want, followers, money, power, is growing so fast it slopes up and to the right. If you put this in your board deck, everyone's high-fiving each other. Yes, like this is the ultimate success. But when you take a step back, you see that this is actually just a small slice of a much larger picture. As of course, the time axis goes far into the future or back into the past. But the y-axis measuring self-interest, it also keeps growing. Because as our self-interest grows, so do our responsibilities. The difference between being an employee and an owner is huge, or between being single and having a family. The entire calculus of your decisions begins to change. And so we can actually think about there being 4 distinct spaces of our self-interest. There's now me, what I as an individual want and need right now. This is where hockey stick graphs live. This is how we think of self-interest today. And this absolutely is our self-interest. But there's also future me, the older, wiser version of me, the person that I hope to one day become. That person becomes real or not real every day based on the choices that I make. There's now us, my friends, my family, my coworkers, the people I'm responsible for. Every decision I make shapes them in some way, and their decisions shape me also. And finally, there's future us, our kids if we have them, or everyone else's kids if we don't. Every choice we make also affects their future too. So the reality is that every decision we make leaves a footprint in all of these spaces, and yet today we're functionally blind to everything other than now me. We know the future matters, we know other people are important, but we struggle to incorporate them into our thinking, and we think of those spaces as less rational, more emotional than that now me. Now, the day I had this idea and drew this sketch, I wrote a very simple description next to it. What was this a 2x2 graph of? It was beyond near-term orientation, a way to see beyond that now me. As I looked at this, I realized it made an acronym, a bento. And I immediately thought of the bento box, the Japanese packed lunch with 4 or 5 compartments and a lid. The bento lets you carry a variety of dishes without anything mixing or getting spoiled. So it always gives you a balanced meal. And the bento also honors a Japanese dieting philosophy called Hara Hachi Bu, which says the goal of a meal is to be 80% full. That way you're still hungry for tomorrow. So bentoism, the bento is the same idea, but for our values and decisions, a way to see beyond that immediate term and a way to see this fuller picture. Now, this isn't just a theory, it's an actual interface, a UI that you can use to make decisions. So here's an example. Let's imagine a smoker asking their bento, should I quit smoking? Now, to use this, you isolate each voice individually and see what it has to say. So in this case, the smoker asks their now us, should I quit smoking? That thinks, oh, my family, we hate it. We want you to quit, of course. The smoker asks future us, should I quit smoking? The future us of their kid says, yeah, you should quit. What if we smoke because of you? The smoker's future me says, yeah, you should quit. I want there to be a future me. But the smoker's now me says, no, you shouldn't quit. I'm addicted to nicotine. Quitting's gonna suck. Like, no way. And every one of these voices is correct based on its very limited perspective, right? And this is where we get trapped because it's hard to reason with that voice that still wants to keep smoking because it has a point. It has a point. And so this is where we get trapped, is in this passive awareness where we only see this now me. And when we have this limited point of view, things like addiction seem rational. You know, it feels good for now, the future and other people less important. And something like sacrifice, where you're giving up something in the near term to get something in the long term, that is unthinkable. Why would you ever do such a thing? So the bento then creates a kind of an active awareness where you have a sense of all these spaces and you have an opinion about them. You know what's important in them. So just a very simple question that you can answer in each one. You know, the now me is, what do I want and need right now? Future me, what does that older, wiser version of me say to do? When I went through this process, I brainstormed all the sorts of things that came to me and then came up with this very simple sort of catchphrase encapsulation in each box of what I care about. My now me is to show people the matrix. I'm at my best when I'm talking about ideas, helping people better see the world. My future me, that older, wiser version of me, is always telling me to create harmony. I'm a child of divorce, so that's like something I'm always fighting with. And to not sell out. You know, if I look back through my career, there's this constant, strong moral value to not trade what's important to me for money. My now us is about having a very core group of friends and family and having deep, hyper-focused time with them. And my future us, what is the world I want? A world with a better matrix. It's not that there aren't norms and things shifting our decisions, but they're actually working to our advantage rather than against us. So for the past few years, I've made every decision using this bento. In fact, I'm looking at it right now above my desk. So a real example, I sometimes get asked to do talks for companies that I don't particularly like. And I never do these. I always say no. And I even get kind of irrationally pissed off at even being asked. But I got asked to do one of these not long after having the bento. And I was really surprised by what happened when I asked it what I should do. So my now me says, I asked, should I do a talk for a company I don't like? My now me says, yeah, you know, you should show people the matrix. This is what you're all about. My now us, which wants deep time with friends and family, says, you know, hour and a half to talk about ideas. We're cool with that. My future us, which wants to build a better matrix, says, yeah, you can't just preach to the choir, like we got to do this. And then my future me says no, and it accuses me of being a sellout. It says that my desire to want to do this, all these other yeses, these are just excuses for the money. And I suddenly realized that that voice that had been pissed off in the past and irrationally angry was my future me. And my future me was a bouncer, like a values bouncer, a big dude standing outside, making sure nothing got in that I didn't want. But because I had this agency to see the full spectrum, I could actually make a decision overruling what I would have done otherwise, and doing so knowing that it is deeply coherent with who I am. Now, the same idea also works in a corporate context, and you can just take existing corporate ideals and plug them into a bento to turn it into a UI. So we could take Apple. Apple's mission is tools for the mind that advance humankind. We're going to sum up its values as think different. And Apple's customer promise, it's always thinking about offering technology that just works, like you don't need a manual to use a Mac. They've also, stick hard around user privacy, a walled garden. And then Apple's vision statement of where it wants to be in 10 years is mankind having advanced because of what they've done. And of course, Apple wants to be bigger. And so we can plug these things into a bento. Your mission is your now me, your brand promise, the things that must always be true of your future me, your now us are your different stakeholders and what you promise to them, and your future us is that vision you're working towards. And so we could show here how well this works to map out what is a good and a bad decision for you as an organization, what is coherent with your strategy. So if we take something like the Apple AirPods and compare them against each of these boxes, we could see that it satisfies all these desires. Yes, for Apple, it theoretically could advance humankind. It fits those now me goals. It definitely fits that future me ideal of think different, right? There's no wires, a different form factor. For the now us, the customer expectation for Apple of wanting just works kind of technology, the AirPods absolutely fulfill that. And then does this seem like a product that could grow Apple? Yeah. So this is a product that fits Apple's bento, fits its ideals, and thus really works. If you compare that to the Apple Touch Bar, which is a little visual strip on their laptops, you could see that yes, it could potentially grow Apple and the now me desires. It does think different. It's not something other laptops tend to have. So it satisfies that future me, but it doesn't just work. The number one complaint from reviewers was that it didn't offer any functionality. So in the end, just because it missed on one of these boxes, it missed one aspect of what we expect from Apple, the product was kind of seen as a failure and something that didn't quite work. And so the importance of seeing each of these spaces is, number one, to think about what's happening in them, because these are real spaces that influence your personal life or your business. And that also when you can make decisions that satisfy all these conditions, you create this greater resonance and this kind of self-coherence where your decisions and the outcomes reach a kind of a flow state. So in a world where we're only seeing now me and we're not seeing this bigger picture, we are limited in our ability to have those ultimate impact. And so I think the limitation of our focus on shareholders, it's not seeing all of now us, and it tends to prioritize only a certain set of values and a certain part of this entire spectrum of what is actually in our self-interest. And so, yeah, so the bento is my focus has been for the last several years, and I now run an organization that has hundreds of people around the world who use this as a decision-making practice in their personal lives, but also launching and funding research that is exploring the future of values that really sees, financial value as in large ways succeeding because of its measurement, its ease of use, and feeling like the bento suggests that is possible with other dimensions of how we interact as human beings. So yeah, I believe that this is the path forward, that it's about expanding what we think of as our self-interest. And that if we do that, the rational outcomes and the things that make sense will just change as a result of that without everybody having to get equally woke or subscribing to the same ideology. It's just simply creating a shared understanding of what the playing field is.
So one of our participants is thanking you and commented that this is a fabulously simple decision-making model. And my question would be, are there areas where limitations arise or where this is less than ideal to be used?
I mean, I'm sure that is the case. I mean, I feel like I am just constantly learning its utility. I think what's helpful about it is how simple it is. And, you know, I use it as a practice in a few ways. It is how I make decisions. Again, I'm literally looking at my bento in front of me. I try to ground myself in what I care about. But I also do something where every week I use the bento to write my weekly priorities. Here's one in front of me. I just draw a blank bento, and in each box, write, what should I do this week? And the now me will give me, you know, errands, work things I need to do. But the future me will remind me of like these disciplines, larger goals I'm trying to continue. My now us will tell me who are the people in my life I want to be in touch with, and I specifically carve out time to be with them. And future us forces me to think, well, for the things I care about, what can I practically do in the next 7 days to make that true? And it's completely changed my time and just how I think about what is important, to where now for me, a good day is one where I actually do something that fulfills each of these boxes. Like it feels good. I can feel that I'm speaking to all parts of who I am. But you know, I view this as it is a tool for personal learning, and there are, you know, a lot of people using it that way. But you know, I ultimately do think that this is a kind of a map to the truth, you know, and that for, you know, for many periods of history, only thinking about now me did make sense. You know, there was a period of time, especially hyper individualism of the last 30, 40 years, where, you know, there's a lot of reasons why this came to be. But the nature of the world in the 21st century, climate change, the pandemic, these collective problems that have arisen by decades of short-term individualism, they require a different way of thinking. You know, we're trying to solve climate change by making our now me experiences better, and that's just not going to work, right? It's a trade-off, and so we have to learn a language to do that. We have to see that that is justified and that it is in our self-interest. And so the world is ready for this. It is what we require. It is the truth of the human condition at this point in time, and maybe in past areas of human life, you know, this wasn't as necessary or acute. But I believe that, especially, you mentioned, you know, millennials, generations Y, Z, generation COVID, you know, they are all going to have strongly different beliefs about, you know, the social contract and about what is important and what is valuable. And I believe that what we're talking about here is a reflection of that world that needs to be built and that we are building. And I have every confidence will happen. In the book I write about, I believe 2050 is the goal for when all of these ideas should be just so normal and invisible, in the same way that short-term individualism is today, that we don't even question it, that we all see things according to, yeah, there's now the future, me and other people, yeah, whatever, old man, like, why are you boring me with this stuff? Like, that's the goal. And we're going to get there. I have no doubt, but I think it's a generational shift, and within 30 years, everyone is going to think this way.
So you talk in your book how in reality there's little order in the world, and how everything is made up, and you know, all it takes for an idea to come to life is for enough people to embrace it, just like it happened with Kickstarter. So then, what do you think it will take for Bentoism to be embraced at scale? And then, you know, what would it take for us as a society to move from this individualistic approach, which we have today, and I'm talking mostly about older generations, and to approach a model that promotes the greater good and long-term sustainability? So basically, how do we set the course for a good society or a better society?
Well, you know, I spent a lot of time researching significant changes. I was really fascinated by you know, the emergence of the antiseptic method, and it was actually quite controversial for many years. This just a way of sterilizing surgery, and it was very contentious, and people didn't want to change their minds. And it took about 30 years for Joseph Lister's ideas to be accepted, and the way they got accepted was largely the existing establishment of doctors dying off, and younger people coming up and learning in medical school, reading, hearing about Lister's ideas, looking at data, which was a very new concept then, data, and being able to see clearly that his ideas were proven to be better. But for people who had already bought in and built their identities on the existing order, there was a real inability to change their minds. And so really waves of death was a lot of what changed things in the past. And I think that is an underrated and part of how things change, is just, we come up with certain mentalities shaped by the era that we're in. So I do think that's part of it, but I don't think it's that everyone subscribes to a specific, belief. I think it's that we accept the idea that a pluralistic notion of beliefs and values is accepted, like that not everyone's supposed to ascribe to the same set of values and ideals. And what I'm most interested in, what really motivated me on this, was seeing in Kickstarter, how even they're in an organization that's trying to do everything the right way, how difficult it is actually to make decisions for the greater good. How you get into positions of, there's path A and path B. Path A has a clear financial outcome and some potentially negative social outcomes. Path B has a lesser financial outcome and what seem like not as bad social outcomes. But like, that's about as clear as it gets. And then you as a leadership team are supposed to decide which path to do. And if it's unclear, you look for what's most legible to guide you to the right decision. And ultimately, this leads to financial thinking, guiding the outcome. Really, 9 times out of 10, that team is going to choose the financial path, unless it is a crisis or unless you have like employee voices putting pressure. Otherwise, they're just going to go for the money outcome. And I was in positions like that as a CEO. And what I constantly felt like was, what we lack here is a universe, like a common language, because a financial argument feels rational, real, like very understandable. Moral arguments, what's right, what should be done, those feel very unclear. They feel emotional. It's easy for them to get into a kind of an emotional peak that doesn't feel appropriate for that type of conversation. And it's not that the emotional, quote unquote, emotional arguments are wrong. I think that they're just being expressed in a different form of language. But I think it's possible for there to be a shared language. And I believe that what's happening now, what will be happening more and more, is that things that we've thought of as moral values, subjective values, are going to be turned into metrics. And we are going to start to actually try to say, this is what a positive community interaction looks like, as measured digitally. There's a super interesting example I write about in the book of Adele distributing concert tickets using a loyalty algorithm. Adele didn't want to have fans just pay hundreds of thousands of pounds to buy tickets on secondary websites. So instead, she used an algorithm from a startup in London, Songkick, that would identify the artist's most loyal fans using social media data and especially invite those people to buy tickets. And so here it was creating an exchange of goods that was optimizing not for a financial return for Adele, but optimizing for this loyalty score, kind of this now us value. And what's funny here is that this might seem altruistic on Adele's part, but actually this is, of course, in her self-interest, because this creates more loyalty with fans, creating more long-term value. And it ultimately works out for her. And that's the secret to this, which is that this more expanded view of self-interest, it actually shows you more paths to succeed, more paths to getting the same outcomes everybody wants now. Right now, where everyone's just trying to get what they want, only pursuing this now me, this bludgeoning of like, how do I get what I want right now? And not seeing that actually like the greatest paths to success are in all these other avenues as well. So I think digital tools are going to make that more plausible. And ultimately, we're going to see data and metrics create more of a universal language around non-financial values and allow us to make collective decisions for things other than money for the first time. And I think that will ultimately lead to what we'll come to call post-capitalism. And I think that all that is coming in the next few decades.
We have quite a few questions coming in. So how shall we go about this? Do you want me to pick them up for you, or will you take charge of this and decide?
You can choose. I'm only just now looking. There's something you think is interesting. How about, all right. How do you see Bentoism as a tool to help companies, that's Claudia, help companies and people build precisely on their integrity and ethics? Are there nuances to be had when dealing with these moral questions? Super interesting. I mean, I do see the Bento as a as a tool for exactly those situations. And it's a tool that's meant to reveal, what it is that you actually want, what it is that is important to you. It forces you to have opinions. I think where it gets especially challenging are you just find these natural tension points. There's a tension between, say, your now me desires for, say, growth, and this future me ideal of like how you want to be remembered. In a corporate context, especially, what stands out is that every company's now me is the same, which is to grow, survive, do better. Every company's future us goal is the same, which is a world that is a world where we are more important in 10 years than we are today. So every company has the same now and future, now me, future us goal. What distinguishes companies then is how interesting and how consistent they are in their future me and their now us ideals. So for Apple has this future me brand ideal of think different, right? And Apple's done a really good job of holding on to that. And then they have this now us ideal of like the technology that's easy to use and that they look out for their customers. And so in those two poles is a guide for what is a product that makes sense and what doesn't. And so, in many cases, what you'll find is that like there's just a tension, there's a natural tension that exists between what you want and then what other people want. And balancing that is the magic of brand building, of creating, companies and products and messages that break through the noise, or as a person, creating a life path that is like actually true to who you are and not just what you're supposed to do. So, these are things you can learn with practice, but I absolutely think it's about grounding you in like what is most deeply resonant with who you specifically are. And that, that just works out better for us.
We have one from an anonymous attendee. So as an expert in disruptive innovation, is there any radical innovation that you envision for the post-pandemic era that you think will disrupt entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell where to start. I think the first thing that jumps to mind is I think that we still underrate, the OpenAI's GPT-3 and its ability to make code, to make websites, to design things. There were a lot of demos when that came out a few months ago showing how you could just enter a simple instruction into a box and it could build you a web page that did what you wanted. And these fit no code sites, things like Bubble, and there are others where you can make a professional web business without having any engineers. It's all plugins. I actually think that the future career prospects for software engineers are dicier than people think. I think what is an in-person business is going to be super interesting. I mean, that's going to be bouncing back in a big way, but I certainly feel a lot more, say, regionalism, localism that I felt in the past after this past year. Maybe that dissipates, post-vaccine, but I'm thinking much more about, say, how to invest and be a part of businesses that are local to me. But yeah, I mean, my biggest, probably the biggest shifts I think are just the climate. I think there's going to be a lot of amazing businesses and opportunities in refactoring society to fit the climate, and that is just like, just yesterday I became a seed investor in a 20-year-old company doing something incredible around the climate. So I think that is just an amazing space. And I do think this new frontier of values is fascinating. And just for the longest time, measurement was the hardest thing about defining what was valuable. Like counting stuff is annoying, especially in the pre-digital era. Now counting and tracking things, distinguishing reasons why people take actions, finding values is we're swimming in them. It's ridiculous how much is accessible to us. So the replicable, scalable reasons to distribute goods, to socially order ourselves, to connect with each other is just proliferating in this crazy way. And I think that's just going to reimagine so much of how the world works. And To date, we've used the amazing potential of data to do the absolute lamest things possible with it. We've used it to sell advertising and to make friends on Facebook. But what we're going to find is that data is going to be, we're just at the start of this. Data is fire. We're still learning to tame it. We're early humans trying to tame a very new tool. But there's research. There's a woman in the US named Salome Villan, who's written an amazing paper about egalitarian data, how we think about how data connects us, and turning those into public goods and new ways of thinking about how we're organized. So there's a whole universe that's happening there that I think is going to just dramatically reshape the universe, and that work is beginning now.
And speaking of reshaping, there's another question. Do you see new profit-making mechanisms to come into existence soon as we move from a capitalist society to a shared economy? And are we on the road of making money obsolete?
I don't think we're on the road of making money obsolete. I think that we are on the road of ending monopolies, ending money's monopoly on value. Right, money has been the universal translator for all forms of value for the last few hundred years. And what we find is that the exchange rates are high, the transaction fees are high, and that in other cases, there's going to be other ways to exchange value. But I think that money is still there as like a paying for your now me needs is maybe the purpose of money. But that social currency is actually going to be just as important. I mean, we can kind of feel that online already, right? There are a lot of people with huge amounts of social currency that are personally broke, but online wield all kinds of influence. But it's a different kind of currency. But I think that what we're going to find is just there are going to be new ways to grow existing values and things we already have. We're going to learn how to convert those things into financial value, into other things that are tradable. And I think that there's going to be a lot more, I'm thinking of specific things that I don't think I'm allowed to talk about, but I think there's going to be a lot of interesting value extraction that's going to happen as these systems kind of break down. So I don't think that money becomes obsolete. I think it becomes distributed in a different way. And, the way to end monopolies, one way is to break them up. The other is just to try to remove their ubiquitous ownership just by creating just a little bit of competition. And I feel like financial value is facing competition for the first time in its history right now. It's competing with attention value, it's competing with a reputational value. It's competing with like woke values. There's a lot of things that it's having to contend with, which is why we're seeing the debate about shareholder maximization reach such a peak these past few years. So, that's the path things are going. It's not going to be this moment where, we triumphantly curb stomp capitalism and Ronald McDonald's head is on a pike. I feel like people want that kind of outcome, which we should not want. Like those are violent, terrible things. It's an evolution, I mean, it has amazing hegemonic powers. It's going to roll with the punches. But what we're going to find is that the value of financial value, it will still be strong, but it's not going to be the only game in town. And, our world will become more diversified as that happens. It's not going to be this triumph where anyone's going to say we won. It's just going to be this dance. But I think things are already moving in that direction.
So many questions. As someone who loves frameworks that help us to understand the world and ourselves, curious to learn how exactly you've developed the bento box concept, and then how it has evolved, but especially how you've put it into use with various audiences, academic researcher versus startup folks, for example.
Yeah, well, it started for me at Kickstarter, where I was trying to, how do we make consistent decisions across the organization and do so in a way where it's not just like trying to grow, trying to do the obvious things. And I was always trying to create a compass. My aspiration was some sort of piece of paper that would so clearly communicate what was important that it would create what I thought of as a post-permission organization. where it was so clear what to do, everybody had permission to go do it. And I never got there as a CEO, but the bento is working towards that same ideal. And, you know, I like spent 2 years researching various things, economics, different aspects of philosophy, writing a book. And I knew my core argument was that our definition of self-interest was too narrow, but I really didn't know what my metaphor would be for how to share it. And halfway through the book writing process, I gave myself a month to just read again. And all along, I was stressed that I didn't have my metaphor, but at the same time, I thought I can't force this. This is the kind of thing where, you know, you have to sneak up on it. You have to relax and it will show itself to you. And during this month I had where I was just reading and researching, I prohibited myself from writing. I had a week where I was just drawing, and I was drawing a storyboard of my book. And I had this thought of how do I draw self-interest, and just had really the exact sort of series of images I show of going from that, you know, the hockey stick graph to then expanding that. That very first day I drew that, I made a video where I like explained the idea to myself. And it was this concept. But since then, and about 2 weeks after I had that idea, I reached out to a friend. I was living in LA, and asked them if they could host some people for me. And I want to host a salon where I would try to present this idea in front of a group of people, and A, see whether I could do it without throwing up, and B, like, do people resonate with this? Am I full of shit or not? And so I did that. Like a week or two later, I stood in front of 30 people in someone's living room and presented the idea, taught it to people. And I started doing that every month, going to people's living rooms and teaching it, building people's bentos on whiteboards. And I just needed to know that it was real, or whether it was real. And I needed to see it in other people's hands. And you learn so much. You learn so much watching other people face their challenges, you know, try to understand their values. There's so many lessons that I've learned from this. And this year, I've taught over 100 of these workshops online, creating a weekly bento. So that process where I like write down my, my priorities each week, that's something I do on Zoom every Sunday. And it's developed into a real practice where there's also now a 12-week like course that 10 people go through together, where you learn the bento, and you even learn how, say, your bento shows your shadow side, the Jungian idea of like we have a light and a shadow. My bento, which I look at as like all the values, the things that I love, the things that are important to me, it also actually reflects all the ways that I get in my way and all my weaknesses. And I can look at it and see like everything I dislike about myself is also written there. And so it just becomes a map to understanding. And, it's something that for me and my family, like this is going to be how I keep thinking about things. And ultimately comes from, I'm a human being, and so I am weaker than I want to be. I don't do as good enough job as I want of thinking about the people in my life, or, I've had moments where I feel like I've let myself down, and I can be mad at myself. I could be frustrated about myself, or I could give myself tools, just try to balance out the ways that, I'm not perfect. And to me, this dead simple form of 4 boxes, and then just a world of understanding that you can create in each one of them, that's made a tremendous difference in me, in just grounding myself in what's actually important, rather than what my social media feed is telling me to care about, what my anxiety is telling me to think about, what my ego wants, all these things that are part of us, are real parts of modern life. And so it's just, how do you help yourself? And to me, the bento is just a tool, just a simple tool that's meant to do that.
I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to take one last beautiful question from an anonymous attendee. Janci, your views seem based on pragmatism and nuance, which is incredibly refreshing and unlike many Silicon Valley leaders. What do you think is the tech industry's biggest cultural blind spot?
Well, I think it's the same naivete we all have of, it's easy to get excited about things, the reality is often much harder. And, it's a lot less fun to fix things than it is to make them, right? It's not easy work. I take a fairly forgiving view, where I just think a lot of this is just so recent and so new, and we're still figuring it out. And I mean, there's a lot of things to worry about. There's a lot of things to be cautious of. You know, we're trying to explicitly manipulate human emotions, you know, to greater degrees than ever before. But in the end, I have a forgiving view. Like I think most people are doing the best they can with what we know, and that we're in a constant process of learning and knowing, and that the dance we have of critics raising issues about certain policies or ways of working, and workers raising their voices and companies responding or not responding, all of this is like the process working. This is how things get solved. You know, this is how we come to understand that certain issues are issues, and how the consensus builds to address them. I mean, the degree to which the voice of the public, the voice of social media, and the voice of employees shapes the outcomes and behaviors of companies, it's like, I don't think it's ever been the way it is right now, you know, to such a great degree. And so I think that the process is working. I think that there is that the things that people are raising are important and true, and that, you know, the smart companies are responding and are trying to be ahead of the curve. And you know, in many cases, we need governments to catch up, and the governments to raise the floor of what is acceptable behavior. But I think to a large degree, I think the public dance and the debates are doing their job. And I think people on all sides are doing what they should be doing.
Yancy, thank you so much for joining us today. I encourage everyone to buy This Could Be Our Future. I read it in a few days. It's a very compelling book. And also you've built a beautiful community around this concept of bentoism. So do check it out. And we hope to welcome you on campus for real at some point in the very near future.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for hanging out and for coming to the reschedule. This was great, and I'll do it again anytime.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. Bye.
Peace.